"We've done it, Commander. The children are aboard," Clorn reported, his antennae twitching with a mixture of pride and unease. Somewhere deep in his mind, though, a warning echoed, this was far from over. The words hung in the sterile air of the alien starship's command deck. Clorn, the second officer, awaited his superior's response, his bifurcated antennae twitching nervously. He hadn't been entirely convinced of the plan, but orders were orders. Their species had suffered greatly in recent encounters with the humans, and capturing a group of their younglings was supposed to be a turning point. Commander Thlax turned from the central viewport, his translucent carapace catching the pale blue light of the star beyond. "Excellent. The human leaders will have no choice but to capitulate now. They will beg for their offspring's safe return. Once they bow, we'll finally reclaim our territories and end their reign of terror." Clorn shifted uneasily. "Commander, if I may, I've heard stories. They say humans are more than just warriors. That they—" "Enough with the stories," Thlax snapped, his mandibles clicking in irritation. "I've heard them too. Superstitious drivel. Humans are nothing more than hairless primates with delusions of grandeur. They rely on their technology and their numbers. Without those, they're nothing." Still, Clorn couldn't shake the unease coiling in his chest. Every time he reviewed past recordings of human operations, he saw the same relentless precision, the same calculated ferocity that now threatened to resurface. The human younglings were held in a secured section of the ship, under constant surveillance. They hadn't been harmed, Thlax had been explicit about that. The point was to leverage their lives, not end them. Yet Clorn had seen the recordings of human soldiers retrieving prisoners in past skirmishes. The precision, the relentlessness, the fury. It was as if something primal awakened in them when one of their own was threatened. "Sir," Clorn said carefully, "perhaps we should increase our defenses. Reinforce the outer perimeter. If the humans discover—" "They won't discover anything until it's too late," Thlax cut him off. "We've taken every precaution. The younglings were isolated. No signals, no trackers. By the time the humans realize what's happened, we'll be light years away." Even as Thlax spoke, Clorn's antennae twitched again. A nagging voice in the back of his mind whispered that something had been overlooked. But he kept silent. Thlax's word was final. Hours passed. The ship's crew went about their duties with mechanical efficiency, maintaining their course toward a hidden staging ground deep within their territory. On the surface all seemed calm. But in the secured chamber, the human children were anything but calm. The air was thick with their hushed whispers and stifled sobs, a tense energy building among them. The older ones, perhaps 12 or 13 cycles old, huddled close, whispering. Their voices were low, but the intensity of their words carried. A few of the younger ones sobbed quietly, their fear and confusion palpable. Yet, as Clorn observed from the surveillance station, he noticed something unusual. The eldest of the group, a boy with dark, sharp eyes, wasn't crying. He was watching, calculating. Clorn leaned closer to the monitor, his breath hitching as the boy gestured subtly to the others. His dark eyes glinted with something that was not fear, but cold, deliberate resolve. The calm, measured movements of his hands made Clorn feel as though he was witnessing the early stages of a plan far beyond his understanding. Then, without breaking eye contact with the lens, he mouthed a single word. Clorn didn't understand the human language, but the look in the boy's eyes sent a chill down his spine. It wasn't fear. It was resolve. "Commander," Clorn called, his voice more urgent now. "I think we should review the containment protocols. The younglings. They're children, Clorn," Thlax said dismissively. "What harm can they possibly do? Are you suggesting we should be frightened of a few immature humans?" Clorn hesitated. "No, sir. I just think it would be prudent to—" "You've made your concerns known," Thlax interrupted. "But I will not run this operation on paranoia. Focus on your duties." Clorn nodded reluctantly and turned back to his station. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were underestimating their captives. He began quietly reviewing the ship's schematics, looking for any weaknesses or hidden vulnerabilities that could be exploited. Meanwhile, in the secured chamber, the boy continued his quiet leadership. The other children followed his lead, their initial terror slowly giving way to determination. They moved with careful precision, masking their actions from the monitoring systems as best they could. Clorn watched, transfixed, as they seemed to communicate silently, passing small objects between them. Pieces of their restraints, parts of their clothing, anything they could use. One of the older girls, with short-cropped hair and a defiant expression, managed to pry a small metal pin from her garment. She handed it to the boy, who began working on the locking mechanism of the door's control panel. The movements were slow, deliberate, almost imperceptible. But Clorn saw everything. "Commander," he tried again. "The younglings are organizing." Flax didn't even look up. "Your imagination is getting the better of you, Clorn. They're frightened children. Let them huddle and cry. It changes nothing." "They're not crying," Clorn said quietly, but he knew his protests were falling on deaf ears. He considered alerting the security team, but Flax's orders were clear. Any deviation from protocol without explicit authorization would result in severe consequences. Clorn weighed his options. If he acted now, he might prevent a disaster. If he waited, he risked being complicit in whatever might come next. Another glance at the screen made his decision for him. He hit the intercom. "Security team, double your patrols in the containment sector. Check every access point. Now." "What are you doing?" Flax demanded, his tone sharp. Clorn stood his ground. "I'm taking precautions, Commander. I believe the situation warrants it." Flax's mandibles flared in irritation, but he waved a claw dismissively. "Do as you will. When nothing happens, you can explain to the crew why you wasted their time." Clorn didn't respond. He returned to his station, heart pounding. The screen showed the boy still working on the panel, his movements steady, methodical. The other children stood watch, their eyes darting to the cameras and the door. They were waiting for something. A signal, perhaps. Or an opportunity. Clorn knew they had underestimated these humans. It wasn't just the boys' calculated gestures. It was the intensity in their eyes, the quiet resolve spreading through the group. Clorn's mind replayed old briefings and battle reports, the moments when human ingenuity turned dire situations into stunning victories. This was no exception, he could feel it. They were on the brink of something catastrophic. And he knew it was only a matter of time before they all paid the price for that mistake. Commander Flax couldn't ignore the knot of irritation growing in his chest. Clorn's repeated warnings were unwarranted, and his insistence on reviewing protocols grated on Flax's carefully constructed plans. Every repetition chipped away at Flax's already thin patience. The humans might be persistent, but they weren't infallible. His crew had followed strict procedures to ensure their advantage. Flax paced the bridge, his translucent carapace gleaming under the cold blue lights. The first sign of trouble came from the outer observation decks. A junior officer, barely out of training, hesitated before reporting a faint distortion in the ship's sensor array, his hand trembling as he reached for the comms. Flax waved a claw dismissively, leaning back in his command chair as though the report were hardly worth his time. "Just a calibration error," he said, though the faint twitch of his mandibles hinted at lingering doubt. It wasn't until several minutes later, when the distortion shifted and began moving toward the ship, that he realized something was amiss. "Commander, I'm picking up an energy fluctuation," the officer said, his voice trembling. "It's approaching fast." "What kind of fluctuation?" Flax snapped, his mandibles clicking in agitation. I'm not sure, sir. The readings don't match any known signature." Clorn, who had been monitoring the surveillance feeds, stood suddenly. "Commander, I think you need to see this." Flax stormed to Clorn's station, his irritation boiling over. "This had better be important, Clorn." The display showed a live feed from the chamber holding the human younglings. The boy who had unsettled Clorn earlier was no longer trying to unlock the door. He was standing at the center of the room, his hands raised as if directing an unseen force. The other children stood behind him, their eyes fixed on his every movement. "They're communicating," Clorn said, his voice taut as he leaned closer to the screen. His antennae stiffened, his movements slow, as if afraid to break the spell unfolding before him. "But not through any visible means. It's like they're using some kind of signal." "Ridiculous," Flax barked. "They don't have any equipment. No transmitters, no interfaces." "Look closer," Clorn insisted. "See how the older ones follow his lead. It's not just fear or obedience. It's coordination. And that energy fluctuation?" As if on cue, the sensors displayed a spike. The distortion, previously a faint blip, grew more pronounced. The ship's automated defense systems began cycling, trying to adjust to the anomaly, but the readings defied standard protocols. "Commander," the junior officer said, his voice cracking, "the fluctuation is now inside our perimeter." Clorn's fronds quivered. "They're signaling something, sir. Or someone." Flax's mandibles ground together. "Enough. Increase security on the containment chamber. I want a full squad stationed outside, armed and ready. Whatever this is, it will not breach this ship." The orders were carried out swiftly. Armed guards filed into position around the secured chamber. They stood motionless, their weapons trained on the sealed door, ready to neutralize any perceived threat. Inside the chamber, the boy lowered his hands. A faint crackle lingered in the air, the lights dimming slightly before the steady hum of the ship's systems returned. The children remained silent, but their expressions had changed. They were no longer afraid. Their defiance was quiet but unshakable. Flax returned to the command console, where the junior officer was furiously running diagnostics. "What have you found?" Flax demanded. "Sir, the energy signature. It doesn't correspond to any known weapons or communication devices," the officer stammered. "It's almost biological." "Biological?" Flax repeated, his voice dripping with disbelief. Clorn turned to Flax, his antennae twitching. "Commander, humans have a reputation for adapting quickly under pressure. If these younglings are using some kind of innate ability—" "Stop right there," Flax snapped. "You're suggesting that these children are somehow manipulating energy fields? That's absurd." Clorn's gaze didn't waver. "Absurd or not, Commander, it's happening. We can't ignore the evidence." Before Flax could respond, the ship shuddered. A low rumble reverberated through the hull, followed by a brief flicker of the lights. The crew froze. Flax's eyes darted to the main display. "What was that?" he demanded. "Unknown, sir," the officer said, panic creeping into his voice. "There's no impact, no breach, but the energy fluctuation has increased exponentially." Clorn stepped forward, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We need to isolate that chamber. If the source is coming from those younglings, containing it might stabilize the readings." Flax hesitated. For the first time since the mission began, uncertainty cracked his stern exterior. But the idea of losing control, of losing face, was unacceptable. "Do it," he ordered finally. "Seal the chamber completely. No one in or out until we understand what's going on." The containment protocols were activated. Heavy shielding descended around the chamber, cutting it off from the rest of the ship. The guards remained at their posts, their weapons now lowered as they waited for further orders. But even with the chamber sealed, the readings didn't subside. If anything, they grew more erratic. Clorn kept his eyes glued to the monitors, tracking the slight movements of the children as they adjusted their positions and exchanged subtle signals. The boy at the center seemed calm, almost serene. He closed his eyes, and for a moment the energy readings stabilized. Then, with a faint pulse, they spiked again. "Commander," Clorn said carefully, "this isn't a simple signal. It's more like a call." "A call to what?" Flax demanded, his voice rising. Clorn shook his head. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's powerful." The ship shuddered again, this time more violently, causing several officers to clutch their consoles for balance. A low groan reverberated through the bulkheads, as if the ship itself were bracing for something worse. Flax gripped the console, his mandibles flaring. "I want answers, Clorn. Now." "Sir," the junior officer interrupted, his voice trembling, I think the energy is coming from them." "From the children?" Flax's eyes narrowed. "Yes, sir," the officer said. "They're generating it. Somehow." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Clorn met Flax's gaze, his expression grave. "We need to reconsider what we're dealing with here, Commander. If this energy is innate, if they can control it—" "Enough speculation," Flax snapped. "Find out exactly what they're doing. I want a full analysis." As the crew scrambled to decipher the mystery, Clorn turned back to the monitors. The boy at the center opened his eyes, his expression calm yet unrelenting. A flicker of defiance seemed to glint in his gaze, sending another chill through Clorn as he realized the child was fully aware of his audience. His gaze was calm, unyielding. Clorn felt a chill run through him. Whatever was happening, it was far from over. Flax's mandibles clicked rhythmically as he stood in the command center, his segmented body tense. Around him, the faint hum of machinery and the muted conversations of the crew created an undercurrent of anxiety. The low, steady beeps of diagnostic monitors and the faint murmur of crew chatter filled the tense air as he stared at the ship's main display. The readings made no sense. Clorn's latest report confirmed it. The energy spikes weren't just localized, they were spreading throughout the ship. Systems were compensating, but only barely. If the pattern continued, containment wouldn't last much longer. "We have no choice," Flax said at last, turning to Clorn. "We need to find out exactly what these younglings are doing." Clorn's antennae twitched. "You want me to enter the chamber?" Flax ordered. "Observe them directly. Take whatever measures are necessary to stop this energy buildup." Clorn felt a pang of unease, his fronds twitching as he weighed the risks. "Commander, that's a risk," Clorn replied cautiously. If these energy readings are truly coming from them, any physical intervention could. We cannot sit idle, Flax interrupted. Our shielding is failing and soon we'll have no way to contain this. You have your orders, Clorn? Clorn hesitated, then gave a stiff nod. Understood, Commander. As Clorn prepared, the tension aboard the ship grew thicker. The crew worked frantically to stabilize critical systems, their movements hurried and precise. The low hum of the engines was joined by an unsettling undercurrent of vibrations, as if the ship itself was resonating with the strange energy. The guards outside the chamber stepped aside as Clorn approached, their movements deliberate, the faint clink of their weapons breaking the heavy silence. He carried a small scanning device and wore an enhanced containment suit, its surface glimmering with a faint iridescent sheen. The chamber doors opened with a hiss, revealing the children within. The boy at the center still stood with his eyes closed. The other children, though outwardly calm, watched Clorn with a quiet intensity. Clorn's fronds twitched. He had been briefed countless times on human resilience and adaptability, but seeing it in person was something else entirely. Identify yourselves, Clorn said, his voice firm. The boy opened his eyes. His expression was calm, his gaze unflinching, as though he had anticipated this moment all along. You have us imprisoned. I think you already know who we are. Clorn felt a jolt of unease. The boy's voice was steady, confident. Not what he had expected from someone so young. What are you doing? Clorn asked. These energy emissions, where are they coming from? The boy didn't answer directly. Instead he stepped forward. The other children followed his lead, moving as a single, deliberate unit. Clorn instinctively stepped back. You've underestimated us, the boy said. You think we're just children, that you can hold us and use us as bargaining tools. But we are more than that. Clorn adjusted the scanner, watching the flickering lines of data stream across its display. The device emitted an erratic beeping, as though it too struggled to comprehend what it was detecting. The device pinged erratically, struggling to make sense of the readings. The energy signatures weren't just biological. They were synchronized, linked in a way that defied explanation. What are you trying to accomplish? Clorn pressed. The boy's expression hardened. We're going home. Clorn barely had time to react before the chamber's energy field pulsed. The scanner's display overloaded, flooding with incomprehensible data. Clorn took a step back, shielding his face as the lights flickered and the room vibrated. The guards outside the chamber raised their weapons, but the door remained sealed. Over the comms, Flax's voice crackled. Report, Clorn. What's happening? They're doing something, Clorn managed. The energy is intensifying. It's coordinated. They're working together. Stop them, Flax ordered. Whatever it takes. Clorn tried to approach, but the energy field surrounding the children pushed back with a pressure that felt almost physical. A low, otherworldly hum filled his ears, and his suit's stabilizers flickered in protest. The boy stepped forward again, his gaze locked on Clorn. We are not your prisoners, he said. And we will not be used as weapons. The room pulsed once more, and the energy field seemed to ripple outward. Clorn stumbled, his suit system struggling to compensate. He heard the muffled shouts of the guards outside, their voices barely audible over the rising hum. Commander, I need more time, Clorn said, his voice tight. I can't approach them like this. If I push any further, time is a luxury we do not have. Flax shouted back. Neutralize them now. Clorn looked at the children, his mind racing. They weren't acting out of fear. They weren't retaliating. They were focused, determined. Whatever they were doing, it was deliberate, controlled. He tried to reason with them. Listen, I don't know what you're planning, but if you keep this up, the entire ship will be compromised, Clorn said, his voice strained. A bead of sweat ran down his temple, his grip tightening on the scanner. We can work something out. Just tell me what you want. The boy tilted his head, studying Clorn. We want to go home, he repeated. And we're leaving whether you let us or not. The energy field surged again, this time with a resonance that shook the chamber walls. Clorn's containment suit blared warning alarms. His scanner shut down completely, unable to handle the overload. Clorn retreated to the chamber doors, his fronds trembling. I can't stop them, Commander, he said into the comms. Their energy output is beyond our containment capabilities. They're controlling it somehow, like a unified force. Then you've failed, Flax spat. Guards, prepare to breach the chamber and terminate the source. Clorn turned back toward the children. The boy met his gaze, calm and resolute. No one is dying today, the boy said. The lights in the chamber flared brilliantly, casting stark shadows on the walls before plunging the room into an oppressive darkness. The air crackled faintly, heavy with residual energy. Clorn's suit switched to emergency lighting, casting the children in eerie red shadows. The air grew heavy, thick with the sensation of power radiating from them. "Commander, Clorn began, but his voice was drowned out as a low, resonant hum filled the ship. The energy field around the children coalesced into a brilliant, shimmering dome. And then they vanished. The chamber was empty. The energy readings dropped off completely. Clorn stood frozen, his thoughts a whirlwind. Images of past training sessions, warnings about human ingenuity, and the impossible readings he'd just witnessed all blurred together in his mind. "Clorn, report." Flax barked. "What happened? Where are they?" "They're gone," Clorn said quietly. "The children are gone." For a moment the command center was silent. Then Flax's voice came through, cold and sharp. "We'll find them again. And this time they won't escape." Clorn said nothing. He stared at the empty chamber, the faint hum of residual energy the only sound left. In the back of his mind one thought took hold. "We've underestimated them. And now we'll pay the price." Clorn stood motionless in the command center, his antennae drooping slightly. Around him, the low hum of the ship's system seemed almost deafening in the tense silence. He felt an ache in his chest, a mixture of defeat and something he couldn't quite place, respect perhaps for what the children had done. The children were gone, yet the weight of their presence lingered in the air. He glanced toward the central display, where the ship's readings were finally stabilizing. The energy fluctuations that had once threatened to tear the vessel apart had ceased entirely. "Commander," he said quietly, "they didn't just escape. They disappeared." Flax's mandibles clicked in frustration as he paced the command deck, his claws scraping lightly against the console's edge. Several crew members shot nervous glances his way, their unease growing with each sharp click. "Impossible. Nothing vanishes without a trace." He stopped abruptly, glaring at Clorn. "They use some kind of technology. Or perhaps a cloaking mechanism we haven't encountered before. Either way they can't be far." Clorn shifted uneasily. He had scanned the chamber thoroughly. No residual signatures, no heat trails, no warp distortions. Nothing to explain how the children had vanished so completely. Whatever the children had done, it defied explanation. "I'll continue analyzing the logs," he offered, though he knew it would likely yield no answers. Flax pointed a claw at the central console. "You'll do more than that. Assemble a search team. I want every system within range scanned. If they used a device, I want it found. If they left a signal, I want it traced. Understand?" "Yes, Commander," Clorn replied, though his voice lacked conviction. He moved to his station, pulling up sensor logs and deploying remote probes into the surrounding void. The command center buzzed with activity as officers scrambled to carry out Flax's orders. Hours passed, but the search yielded nothing. The probes returned without finding a single clue, and the logs remained a tangle of unidentifiable energy patterns. Clorn tried every analysis tool at his disposal, but the data was either corrupted or so alien that it defied interpretation. Meanwhile, Flax grew increasingly agitated, berating his subordinates and demanding results. "They have to be out there," Flax hissed, slamming a clawed hand against the console. "Humans are cunning, but they're not gods. They can't just vanish." Clorn kept his head down, resisting the urge to argue. He knew Flax wouldn't listen, but the thought of the children's determined expressions and the events he'd just witnessed gnawed at him. The commander's pride was at stake, and admitting that the children's disappearance might be beyond their comprehension was not an option. Eventually, Flax's fury turned to suspicion. He approached Clorn's station, his piercing gaze boring into the officer. "You were the one who insisted on enhanced containment protocols. You knew more about these humans than anyone else aboard. Is there something you're not telling me?" Clorn felt his fronds quiver. "Commander, I've reported everything I observed. The energy readings, the synchronization between the children, the way they seem to move as one." "Then how do you explain this?" Flax demanded, gesturing to the empty chamber on the display. "What did you miss?" "Nothing, Commander," Clorn said, though doubt gnawed at him. He had watched the children closely, noted every movement, every whisper. And yet he couldn't explain what he'd seen in their eyes, a calm certainty that seemed to transcend the chaos around them. Flax's mandibles flared, but before he could press further, a junior officer called out. "Commander, we have an incoming transmission." The command center fell silent. Flax straightened, his demeanor shifting instantly. "From where?" "It's coming from a nearby sector," the officer replied, her voice shaky. The origin point matches the trajectory the children would have taken if they escaped through a conventional means. On screen, Flax barked. The main display flickered, then stabilized. A human woman appeared, her features sharp and unwavering. Her calm, deliberate gaze seemed to pierce through the screen. Clorn recognized her from the consortium's intelligence briefings. She was a high-ranking member of Earth's diplomatic corps, known for her sharp mind and even sharper tongue. "Commander Flax," the woman said, her voice cool and measured. "I trust you've had time to reflect on the consequences of your actions?" Flax bristled. "You dare address me as though I'm the one at fault? Your younglings were taken as a necessary step toward ensuring peace." The woman's expression didn't change. "You abducted children, Commander. That is not a step toward peace. It's an act of war." Clorn watched as the tension in the room thickened. The human's calm demeanor only seemed to fuel Flax's anger. "We are the victims of human aggression," he snapped. "Your species has pushed us to the brink. Taking those younglings was the only leverage we had left. And now you have none," the woman replied, her tone cold and unyielding. "They are beyond your reach, and any further attempts to target human lives will be met with decisive action. Consider this your only warning. Consider this your only warning." Flax's mandibles twitched, his claws clenching against the console. "You cannot threaten me, human. We are prepared to defend our territory. We will not bow to your demands." "Then prepare for the consequences," the woman said. "Because humanity does not forgive. And we do not forget." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the command center in tense silence. Flax stood frozen for a moment, then slammed his fist against the console, causing several officers to flinch. "Find them," he roared. "Find them and bring them back, no matter the cost." Clorn said nothing. He stared at the empty chamber on his monitor, the faint traces of residual energy barely visible. The image of the children's determined expressions lingered in his mind, a haunting reminder of what had just unfolded. His mind raced, replaying the events over and over. He knew he had witnessed something extraordinary, something he could never fully explain. As the crew scrambled to carry out Flax's orders, Clorn allowed himself one moment of reflection. The children were gone, yes. But they hadn't just escaped. They had outmaneuvered an entire warship, outwitted a species known for its intelligence and cunning. It was a victory that left Clorn both awed and deeply unsettled. He turned back to his console, determined to keep searching, even as a part of him knew the truth. Those children were no longer captives. They were free. And they were far beyond Flax's reach.